Howdy, folks. This is Miriam Hinane, investigative journalist, functional medicine consultant, best known for directing the movie Vanishing of the Bees. I'm walking back from a friend's house, and I'm going to be doing a transmission, that's what I'm calling it, hopefully, regarding George Floyd, as I show you the jungle where I sought refuge in March, because I've been covering virus since January, along with Zach Voorhees, Google whistleblower. So in regards to George Perry Floyd, I did not mean to go down this rabbit hole. It started with Zach wanting to recreate the choking. And so all 108 pounds of me, or probably gained a few pounds since lockdown, and obsessively researching 10 hours plus a day. Of course, I'm smaller, but he could speak, and his larynx wasn't impacted, so he could breathe and he could speak. Now later, Benjamin Crump, attorney who has represented Eric Garner, who I believe in 2014 Eric Garner was also caught stating, coincidentally, I can't breathe 11 times. Okie dokie. So later Benjamin Crump says it's a fallacy that if you can talk, that you can also breathe. Now, of course, after 9 minutes, and what we saw as urination leaving George Floyd's bladder, that maybe he lost consciousness. We'll get to that and the very peculiarities of the autopsy report. So when he said that, my first inclination was, well, let's look at the death certificate. Let's look at the autopsy report. Mind you, I have been in a coroner's office in LA. I thought I was going to see a CSI scene. There were bodies all over the place. My understanding is toxicology takes about 6 weeks. Goodness knows under coronavirus times. But maybe not when you're dealing with what will be a bombastic trial of arguably OJ proportions. So I call the medical examiner and I have that call. She says on record the test certificate will take weeks and weeks. There is a very preliminary autopsy report. CNN runs with it. It's on the Hennepin County. Now, this autopsy report has changed and morphed over the week from May 25th or 26th to June 3rd. There were 3 iterations. They found tons of drugs, meaning fentanyl, amphetamines, nicotine, cannabis in his body. The transcript, which I've also read and obtained, of the 911 says he was, quote, awfully drunk. So there's that. The fact that there's this emergency autopsy report. Now, again, perhaps it's all was quickened up. The interesting thing is on June 1st, Benjamin Crump and his independent examiner, Michael Baden, who also did Eric Garner's body, who also did Epstein's body, and for the record, found that Epstein had homicided himself versus what someone else had said, that he had committed suicide. The mainstream did state the opposite, as those prostitutes do. So just for the record, that he found Epstein's body homicide. He also worked on OJ. So he takes big profile cases, as does Benjamin Crump. On the same day, these completely different autopsy reports. Now, there are Happens to be two different techniques of autopsying a body. One which necessitates, according to the coroner I interviewed years ago, a little bit more finesse, where you're weighing the body parts one by one. Also, if you look at the beginnings of another car in the horizon. Everybody says hi here. If you look at the beginnings of autopsies, they're quite grisly. They would take pictures alongside the bodies. And one even I found was, she lived for others, but she died for us, emblazoned across a table. Okay, so two different, very opposing. Let's just look at the details, which is where the devil lies, where many don't look, unfortunately. Was the body transported to Texas to do the independent? Likely not, since they transported it for the funeral, which was a closed casket, golden plated. Don't know if it was real gold, but do know that GoFundMe raised, and people raising all kinds, and celebrities promoting, and we'll get to that too, shaming people, virtue signaling into taking the knee. This is such shaming. So it's okay. Reverse racism is okay. Misbehaving as a human is okay. So how could you come up with two different? How could one say that he has all these comorbidities, diabetes, hypertension, and drugs in his system, while Baden says that he was perfectly healthy? Now, did Baden's autopsy report look for coronavirus? That's another thing. Oh my FG, when we found out that, of course, he, George, was COVID-19 positive with a shitty PCR test that doesn't mean squat. So on April, he supposedly got a coronavirus. I'd like to know about that, because according to his either roommate or person who lives in the same building as him, he was not there for the last 2 weeks. The idea was he was with his fiance, who describes him as the most spiritual person she knew. Was he under quarantine? Was she under quarantine? Has she been tested? They swabbed him again. He was still COVID-19 positive. That's very interesting. It's a very good tie-in so that we can use to contact, trace, track, test whoever we want, especially now that health officials who've been keeping us under voluntary lockdown, house arrest for months, are now saying that in the face of social justice, social distancing goes out the window. And these thousands of health officials, will they recant and go, whoopsie, we were wrong, when another study conveniently brought back the storyline of the asymptomatic, which we were covering in January, that this virus crisis allows you to be asymptomatic for more than 14 days. We were saying that in the beginning, according to the research. And we know that getting the asymptomatic, getting them tested, is another way to track and trace. And now, so we have mayhem, where Minneapolis looks like Baghdad, where BLM, that is arguably funded by George Soros, as is Antifa, causing disruption, causing civil war with the race card. When there is violence of blacks on blacks, when not all police. So BLM wants to defund police, release felons. Now listen, one, what happened to all those felons that were released? They seem like they'd be perfect cast for this, these jobs of dressing up as cops, dressing up as militia, and burning things, and this whole melee of disruption. Second thing, so a BLM not only stands to defund police, to release felons. Now, if we're talking about felons that are in there because of drug use, I would say that arguably they should not be there to begin with. Is there any rehab programs? Who are these felons? And why do you want to release felons? Because yes, there's more blacks that are in prison, and there's a prison industrial complex. So this is deep-rooted, right? As a black person, the injustice. Now, on the other hand, is victim stance. And I know I'm digressing from George. We'll go back. But digressing from this victim mentality, realizing that you have also juiced the system and enslaved your own selves. And I speak for anybody that is entrapped in victim stance. I myself have still working on getting away, especially when you have been victimized. I have been a victim of censorship. I have been a victim of techno-fascism. It's not what happens to you, but what you do with what happens to you. So, if you take advantage of the system and you allow the system to further enslave you, someone called it slaveocracy. Okay? So, this was racial supposed murder. You know, Derek was married to an Asian woman. He was surrounded by a Hispanic cop. There are other cops that have now been charged. How do you know that it's race? Especially when they work together. Especially when you learn the shenanigans or the deep roots of El Nuevo Rodeo, when you realize that in January there was $900,000 worth of $1 counterfeit bills that was stopped by the Minnesota State Department. This was made in China, came from China. January 27th, I believe, at the same time that Wuhan was getting shut down. And people were arguably being welded into their homes and dying. So we know that there's a counterfeit problem, or there's counterfeit money. There's corruption in the Minneapolis Police Department. In 2006, Derek, along with other officers, were implicated in a case filed by an inmate. That case is NA on Pacer. I'm trying to get a hold of it. Interestingly, Minnesota holds its archives in Chicago. So, in that suit, all I could extract was that there were other police officers. It was an inmate who could not pay the $340 filing fee. And then the case was dismissed. Can we venture to say there was probably violence involved with this inmate? Could we venture to say that maybe Derek is a dirty cop? What was he doing with El Nuevo for 17 years? El Nuevo was fronted by a woman named Maya that had a radio station, PR relations, and the station burnt down, as did Precinct 3, as did El Nuevo Rodeo. Coincidentally, just so happens El Nuevo is a 2-minute drive from the police station, burning in flames, using the element of fire to have us live these cataclysmic, apocalyptic times. Okay, so Omar Investments owns El Nuevo. A woman by the name of Mona Sabri